In this lecture, we're going to talk about another important resource and system found on planet Earth, and that is soil. In this lecture, we'll take a look at how soil forms, soil properties. We'll then take a look at soil profiles and how they form, look at the environmental issue of soil erosion and how we can solve that problem of soil erosion with soil conservation. Let's first familiarize ourselves with what soil is. It is simply not dirt because dirt is essentially dead, dried out soil. So soil is a mixture of minerals, organic matter, water, air, and even living organisms that support the growth of plants. Now, the major constituent of soil is minerals. These are eroded rocks that have weathered into different sizes. So 45% of soil is typically is minerals. Then there's a lot of air in soil. 25% of the soil component is made of air, and then 25% is water. This may be somewhat surprising, but it's very, very crucial that there is air available because when plants grow, the roots need oxygen, as do many of the organisms that grow in the soil along with the plant roots. Water, of course, is very crucial for plant growth. Humus is, or humus as it probably should be pronounced, is basically a highly decomposed organic material. It's very dark in color and adds richness to the soil and is a very important part of its structure. And of course, the remaining 10 to 15% of the soil is made up by living organisms, or excuse me, I should say 10 to 15% of the organics that we find in soil. So this could be anything from the bacteria that are in the soil that are an important part of the nitrogen cycle. This could be mycorrhizal fungi that are important, have an important relationship with plant roots. It could be earthworms or anything that is going on in the soil. So soil is very, very dynamic. It is an ecosystem in and of itself. So it's really not dirt. It's an important characteristic. Soil takes a long time to form, and as we discovered with primary succession, that's one of the reasons primary succession is so much longer than secondary succession, because soil needs to erode from rocks and develop over time. So let's look at factors that affect this. So first of all, the parent material. What kind of rock is being broken down and how is it being broken down? Is it being broken down by water, through winds, or perhaps even soil producing organisms like lichens? The climate plays a role, particularly temperature and the amount of rain. So usually the warmer the climate, the faster the soil formation and the more precipitation, the more water-based erosion, and therefore faster soil formation. Organisms play a vital part, right? We talked about lichens, the types of plants that are growing there, then plants with extensive root systems are significant. What kind of microbes are there? All of that is important for giving soil its fertility and viability. The topography or relief of the land is important. You'll find that flatlands tend to develop soil, thicker beds of soil, than if the topography is very steep. So on the hillside, there's a tendency for any soil to form to erode or fall down the slope. And so soil beds can be a little bit thinner on hillsides and on mountains. And of course, time is an important factor. This all takes process. It's a long-term continuous process that needs time to occur, as we've again learned going back to primary succession. Now let's switch and take a look at the properties of soil. What is it that makes it very different than dirt, and why is it so important? Well, soil texture is an important characteristic or property of soil. This is its proportion of three important particle sizes in the minerals: sand, silt, and clay. A soil triangle is a tool that is used to help us classify soil based on its texture. And it is based on the percentage of clay, silt, and sand. The smallest of these particles is clay, very, very small particle. The largest are sand particles. So the way a soil triangle works, let's say we collect a soil sample and we find that it's 20% clay. So 20% of the sand is clay, 40% is silt, and 40% is sand. Well, the way a soil triangle works, you'll notice there's these very subtle arrows here pointing the direction in which you would draw lines. So from the 20% clay, we would draw a horizontal line across. From the 40% silt, we're going to draw a diagonal line down to the left. And the sand would go up and to the left. There's a point of intersection or congruence here where we see that wherever that point of intersection is where we classify our soil. So you can see this type of soil as a mixture of clay, silt, and sand is known as a loam. And a loam is an important soil type. It is considered to be the ideal soil for growing crops. And you can see that there is a true loam, which is about 40% silt, 40% sand, 20% clay. But if there's a little more clay, you could have a clay loam, or a silt loam, or a sandy loam. So they're all kind of named based off of the amount of particles. Anything that has loam in it is usually a good soil for growing crops. Pure clay wouldn't be very good, and we'll talk about why that is. And pure silt and pure sand, like we may find on a beach or desert, isn't really great for growing plants as well. And I think we'll talk about those, why that is, as we go through this lecture, and I think some of it will be obvious. Now, another property is soil structure, and this is the arrangement of these particles along with the organic matter, the humus that is part of it, that allows it to clump together to hold water appropriately and form what we call an aggregate or a PED. So when you pick up healthy soil, there will be PEDs, or little clumps of soil that stick together, but they also easily crumble. That's really important for plant roots to be able to make their way through the soil. You want the soil to be firm to allow for plants to root themselves, but you also want them to crumble to allow the roots to continue to grow through the soil bed. Soil porosity is another important property, and this is the measure of empty spaces in the soil. And remember, we want our soil to have plenty of space for water and air. So soil that can form a PED but then can crumble easily is called friable, right? And so we want it to be moist and we want it to crumble, and that is usually because you have a nice combination of different soil particles. Here we can see we've got some sand grains, and then we also have some silt grains and a lot of little clay. This allows for macropores and micropores, all of which are important for giving soil this friability, this crumbly texture. This is also important for water holding capacity because you want space for air and you want space for water. So water holding capacity is the ability of soil to retain water so that you can have it accessible for plant roots when they need it. Soil that has very poor water holding capacity may require too much irrigation and waste water resources. So soil that has too much sand in it won't hold water very well, and therefore won't be good for plant growth or may require excessive irrigation. If it's got too much clay, well then it may hold water too much, right? So we look at heavy clay soils, they may hold too much water, and that may waterlog the soil and drown the roots out. Plus the clay, you know this if you've ever taken a pottery class, if you have pure clay and you add water to it, well, it can make pottery and it can become very hard and dense. Not a great situation for plant roots to embed themselves. So sand doesn't hold water very well, right? And that's one of the concerns with desert ecosystems is any rain that does fall in the sand isn't held, right? And so plants struggle with it. Any plant growing in a desert has to have a mechanism to store water within its own tissue because there's not much being held by the sand. And then clay holds too much water. All right, so the ideal water holding capacity is usually whenever we have a loam. Loams will have kind of a medium water holding capacity. They don't dry out quickly, but they also don't get drenched and hold too much water that could possibly drown the plant. NPK stands for the macronutrients, the three macronutrients that plants need: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. and this is based off of their symbols in the periodic table. And so nitrogen is an essential nutrient for making plants green. This adds leafy growth and is an important component for chlorophyll. So if you want plants to have a nice green texture, you want to make sure they have plenty of nitrogen in there. So it's a very, very important component. Phosphorus is important for the roots. So the phosphorus is great. It's an important component in the soil. There's no component, you may recall, in the phosphorus cycle in the atmosphere. It's really only found in the soil, so therefore it's a very important component for plant roots. And it's going to make for a healthy plant overall. And then potassium helps to regulate a whole wide range of plant functions, including movement of water, the transport of nutrients, and even where they deposit the carbohydrates they make during photosynthesis. So potassium really is kind of like all around well-being. So all three of these macronutrients are important to plants. There are some micronutrients that they require, and we'll talk more about that as we look at more properties in soil. Now, a soil may have plenty of nutrients to offer plants, but one thing that's interesting is plant ions, especially cations or positive ions that are micronutrients for plants, need to be exchanged with soil. So there's this interesting property, and this gets into some chemistry, known as cation exchange capacity, and it's how well the soil can hold on to essential nutrients that are positively charged and offer them to plants. So one of the interesting phenomenons is that clay, which we know is an important part of a loamy soil, right? You want to have clay, not too much, but just enough to be present, because the clay particles tend to have a lot of negative binding sites on them, as you can see in this diagram over here. Same thing with organic matter. It tends to have a lot of negatively charged surfaces. These negatively charged surfaces will hold on to important cation or positive nutrients like calcium, magnesium, potassium, as we've mentioned in the previous important macronutrient, and even ammonia, which is an important soil component for plants as they assimilate nitrogen into their body. But the clay is holding on to the particles, so it's not really biologically ready to be absorbed by the root hairs of the plant. So this is what the plant actually has to do. So there's a lot of negatively charged binding sites on this clay particle. The plant will actually do an exchange system, and it uses chemistry. So the plant root will go ahead and add carbon dioxide into the soil. There should be water available in the soil. So the reaction is that carbon dioxide, when it reacts with water, will form carbonic acid and make hydrogen ions. Again, that's the definition of an acid, is that when it's in an aqueous solution, it will go ahead and yield high protons, a lot of protons here. So that then allows the exchange of one proton to kick off one of the important positive cations that the root hairs need. So they basically offer a hydrogen through chemistry and then absorb the liberated positive cations. This is why it's called a cation exchange capacity. And we'll be testing this in our lab, and basically one of the ways you can test this is to see if we put a positively charged dye in with soil, does it hold on to that dye? Well, if it does, then that means the positively charged dye was able to stick to the clay particles in the soil, and therefore it has a high cation exchange capacity. Soil pH also affects the availability of nutrients for soil, so or for the plants. If the soil is too acidic, if its pH is like, below 5, all of a sudden certain elements become so abundant that they can be toxic. So things like aluminum, iron, and manganese, basically they become extra soluble when the pH goes down to these levels of below 5. And now we can see that can weaken the plant, makes it prone to pathogenic infections. And so one of the concerns with acid rain is if it decreases the pH of the soil, then it makes the soil very toxic and bitter, essentially, for plant growth, and that's why the trees will die. Not necessarily due to the acid itself, but to the change in the pH conditions that affect the solubility of these important elements. Neutral soils, which will basically be between 7 and 6, and that's usually what plants prefer, at least most crops that we grow. And when the pH is in this healthy range, we can see there's a lot of things going on, a lot of good things, right? There's a proper balance of the micronutrients that the plant needs. There's a lot of detoxification going on, so that basically helps to prevent any pathogenic bacteria or things affecting the plant. There's a lot of water capacity, high available water capacity in the soil when the pH is right. So neutral pH is a healthy soil for the plant to thrive. If the soil becomes too alkaline, say way above 7, now we have a situation where some essential micronutrients may become less available, right? So all of a sudden iron becomes immobile in these pools of iron in the soil, right? You start to have a lower water capacity. And so now the nutrient uptake is affected a little bit here. So the plants don't grow as much. It's not the ideal conditions for them. Now let's discuss soil profiles, which basically is taking a look at how all those properties we just studied in soil will change as we go deeper into the ground. And the specific layers of soil that with these different characteristics in composition, color, texture, and other physical and chemical properties are known as horizons. The uppermost horizon in any soil bed is known as the O horizon, and the O basically stands for organic materials. So this is where in a forest you might see an abundance of leaf litter. In a lawn or a grassland you might see decomposing grasses as they maybe die during the winter. In a flower bed or your garden, this would be your mulch layer. So that's your organic material that is decomposing. Below that then is your A horizon, also known as the topsoil. This has a lot of minerals in it, and it tends to be a dark color because it's rich in that organic matter, that humus, and plants love that. So a well-developed topsoil is what plants thrive in, and that's essentially what potting soil is at the garden center. The E horizon is known as the alluviation layer, and this basically is an area where water, as rains, water will percolate through the A horizon, and as it does that, it's going to carry some of those minerals with it down through this layer. So this is sometimes called a leaching area. So it's bringing down clay and iron and aluminum oxides down into the layer below that, which is the B horizon. The B horizon is the subsoil, which tends to have soil that's a little denser, less organic material, so it's not going to be as dark as the A horizon. And sometimes, as if there's a lot of iron, it'll kind of get a red color. So there's a lot of iron oxides, and so it'll have a rich brown or red color to it. The C horizon is the parent material, the deepest soil layer consisting partially weathered parent material here. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. And R horizon is essentially the bedrock that has not been weathered into soil. Okay, so this is a soil horizon. This is a nice illustration here to include with your notes. If you want to see what it looks like for real, this is a cross section of soil that basically was cut away, and so you can see the O horizon, the rich A horizon, an alluviation layer where now you're seeing the red iron oxide start to form in a brown subsoil right here. Here is the C horizon where you can see there's some soil, but there's still a lot of bedrock there, and then the R horizon where the bedrock itself is. Soil horizons will differ significantly based on the biomes. The climate, vegetation, and decomposition rates will affect how these layers form over time. Grasslands tend to have very thick A horizons, and this is because grasslands have a period of growth and decay every season. So during the spring and summer, grasses will grow. During the winter, they die off and are decomposed, and this over time leads to a very organically rich and deep A horizon that forms. In forests, well, trees don't go through that same level of decay. They will lose their leaves each autumn, and that contributes to the formation of soil as well. But the A horizon tends to be very thin, and they tend to have a thicker B horizon, which is good for the plant roots, right? Because the plant roots are going to reach deeper into the soil than, say, grass roots. And so a nice thick B horizon is very accommodating for the tree roots that are embedded in that lower or deeper soil layer. And deserts really have very little horizon material, very little organics in there. You can see the A horizon is formed here, but it's very sandy and it's not dark in color. There's not a lot of organic material there. There's no alluviation layer, right? Because there's very little rain, right? So there's no formation of that layer where things are leaching down into the B horizon. And so there's not as dynamic a system here in the soil bed as you might find in a grassland or forest. Let's now talk about the complexities of soil erosion. This is a global problem that is occurring. And so basically when we talk about soil erosion, we're talking about the displacement of that top layer of soil, that A horizon. And so this can happen for a number of reasons. Wind can blow it away, water can wash it away, gravity can pull it down a steep slope, and this can all be accelerated by human activities, as we'll touch on in just a moment. Looking globally here, this map here is showing you silt transportation, which again, silt is a major component of many soils that are good for growing crops, and we can see this is the metric tons of silt lost per square kilometer. So we can see in areas where we have our rainforests, a lot of rainforests are losing a lot of soil. We see a lot of farmland, grasslands here in the United States, a lot of soil loss, right? So this is a global problem that we're concerned with. And so the human-related or anthropogenic causes of soil erosion can be intensive agricultural practices, so farming at a rate that's faster than the soil can handle. The loss of trees, deforestation, which we see quite a bit in the Amazon rainforest, right? There's a lot of slash and burn agriculture. Trees will be cut down, they burn the trees, and then they grow crops, and then the soil kind of dries out because of the intensive agricultural practice. Construction will erode soil. We tear out trees and grasses, and often we'll have a lot of dirt lots just kind of sitting there waiting for contractors to build on them, and so that soil is all exposed to erosion. Simple lack of vegetation in areas as the climate is shifting and we have prolonged areas of drought can lead to concern. So what are the consequences of all these things? Well, we have decreased agricultural productivity, right? So if soil is washing away because of intense rainstorms or windstorms, then all that good organic layer, as you can see here, is washed away, and the plants and crops are going to struggle there. We have a lot of water pollution. That soil, when it erodes away, needs to go somewhere, and often it finds itself into streams of water, which can then be deposited out into into lakes, even in the ocean. There's been a problem with sedimentation settling on coral reefs, and the corals don't do very well because they can't handle all that sediment laying on top of them. It suffocates them and also blocks light from reaching the algae that grow inside them. We have a lot of flooding and landslides associated with this, especially in hilly areas, and dust storms. So you may recall in U.S. history learning about the dust storms in the United States. They're also currently happening in less developed lands too. Quite terrifying looking storms, right? These are basically areas where if the soil is not covered, the wind will just blow all of that debris. And during the dust storms, they were times when they had like several inches of dust that would collect inside farmhouses and stuff because it was just so intense. So these are very concerning globally as we see soil being eroded due to human practices, that we're seeing more of these dust storms, which really degrade our soil quality. So what can we do to help with this problem? How can we reduce this erosion concern? Well, soil conservation is a practice of trying to prevent that. It's trying to prevent soil erosion, the degrading, and the loss of soil fertility. And the idea is we want to have plenty of soil to grow our crops, our food that we need. So what are some methods that we would do to promote soil conservation? Well, let's first look at the physical methods. What could we physically do? Well, one thing is we can use what's called terracing, where we cut if we're trying to farm on a mountainside, for example, or if we have a steep grade, we can actually cut steps into the area because those flat areas allow our crops to grow, retain water, and prevent soil from running down the mountainside. So that's known as terracing. We also have contour plowing, which is basically, as you notice from this picture, we would plant our crops and till the soil along with the contours of the hill. We wouldn't plow or plant crop rows going up and down the hill, but rather along the side of the hill. This basically creates ridges that retain water and don't allow it to just flow down channels down the hillside. We also can use windbreaks. These are basically areas of shrubs or trees that line fields that act as windscreens. It basically reduces the wind speed and prevents any wind from carrying the soil away. There's also some biological methods, such as using cover crops. This is basically where we would plant crops to just simply cover the field, cover the soil so it does not blow away. So here we can see this is a corn that has been planted after they planted some fast growing grass here just in the off season. The grass was only there to protect the soil, and they've allowed the grass to die and kind of cover the soil. It's going to be decomposed, which adds natural nutrients to the soil, and the crops can grow from there. We can also rotate our crops. We've found that if you keep growing the same crop in the same area of soil, same field, excuse me, year after year, then it degrades soil quality. So if you rotate your crops, perhaps one year you're growing wheat, and then here this is canola oil or canola, as you can see, a very common crop up in Western Canada, and then also soybeans. And what's interesting, if you put soybeans in your field every 3 years or so, that adds nitrogen back into the soil and adds an important nutrient. So basically rotating what you grow in a particular field will help to improve the soil quality. We can also use afforestation or reforestation, basically planting more trees in areas because trees protect the soil. So that is helpful. And related to that is agroforestry, where basically we're learning that our fields can also have trees. It helps to protect the soil, and you can see the cows here. This is, I believe, in a picture from Florida where agroforestry is kind of gaining popularity, where you won't just see cows in a field, but you'll see them kind of in a tree plantation like this. The trees are there to protect the soil. The grass is able to grow. There's plenty of water available for the grass and plenty of vegetation for the cattle to graze upon. There's also what we call conservation tillage, which is an approach that minimizes any disturbance to the field. And so one practice is known as no-till farming. Basically, don't plow the fields. When you're planting new crops, you just plant directly on the crop residues from before. So if you think about it, the way a natural grassland works, it's not that the natural grassland, a prairie ecosystem, isn't plowed by a combine or anything. A combine wouldn't plow the field, but I mean, it's not tilled, right? The soil is not disturbed. Basically, you just have the grasses will grow and decompose each season. And so if you do that with see, these are corn stalks here, right? And they were harvested by a combine, and you just leave what's left of the stalks there. You don't plow it over. That keeps carbon in the soil, and you just allows the new series of crops to grow within the residues, right? And basically that forms an organic horizon. You can also use strip tilling, where basically you don't plow over the whole field, but only in certain areas. This will help to protect the tilled soil from any further erosion, because there's some plants adjacent to it to kind of keep it in place. All right, let's do a little AP practice, a little review here on what we learned about with soil. So here we're looking at a soil triangle. So the question is, which soil indicated on the soil triangle above would most likely have the highest water holding capacity? So the correct answer here is C, right? Because this is where you have the most clay. So the clay is going to hold the most water, and so your highest water holding capacity. Further review, which would have the least water holding capacity? Well, that would be A. That's because it's 100% sand. You'll get more familiar with this concept in the soil triangle as we go through our lab for this lesson. Here is your FRQ. You can go ahead and pause the video here and take some time to answer this portion of a FRQ. Okay, let's go over the correct answer here. So we're looking at a graph here that's showing the effect of percent slope on annual erosion for 4 agricultural practices, right? So let's look at our data. Let's unpack it here. We've got our slope, which is basically how steep is the hill. So 0 would be like flat land, and then 15 to 30 is getting pretty steep, right? Over here is the amount of erosion. No surprise that basically erosion increases as the hill gets steeper, and we see that in all instances of the data that's plotted here. The different lines show tillage, that is where we plow a field. No-till, we don't plow the field. This dashed line is no-till agriculture with a cover crop, and then the thin line is just crop rotation. So soil erosion is one of the most serious soil degrading processes. Each year tons of soil erode from cropland, pastures, forests, and other places. The amount of erosion varies dramatically among various land use types. The figure above shows the effects of different agricultural practices and slopes on annual erosion rates. Part A, refer to the graph. Number 1, identify the scientific question that resulted in the data presented above. Well, your scientific question would be something like this. What is the relationship between slope and annual erosion rate? Or does crop rotation, tilling, not tilling, using cover crops on various slopes increase, decrease, or change erosion rates? Okay, those would be appropriate scientific questions to come up with. Part 2, identify the agricultural practice that could be used on a 15% slope without leading to higher than tolerable loss of soil. So let's look here. So notice there is this T, this tolerable loss, and so let's go to a 15% slope, and the only agricultural practice that is plotted below that tolerable loss is the thin line, which is crop rotation. Part 3, describe the effect of adding cover crop compared to using a no-till method. So adding a cover crop reduces the annual rate of soil erosion, right? We can see that here. And then adding a cover crop could also allow planting on greater sloped land before reaching tolerable loss. So you could have described it that way. Part 4, identify one natural mechanism of soil erosion, and that is moving or flowing water, rainfall, and winds. Those would all be the 3 acceptable point getters on that one. Okay, so hopefully you did well on that, and that wraps up this lecture on soil. We now will be focusing on a lab where we'll look at soil productivity.